Hello everyone, and welcome to the 42nd Objective-C tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how we can use the __ block storage type, as well as how we can put blocks into Objective-C methods, so actually passing blocks of code into methods in Objective-C. So basically I've already had two tutorials on blocks, really showing you introduction to creating block variables and the like. So if you haven't watched those, make sure you watch those ahead of this one, and but I'm going to do a quick recap if you already have watched those. So basically a block just simply represents a block of code. You define a block variable. It has either it can return something like a function can. It can also take parameters similar to a function, but you basically define the block once, and that block of code is just what you define it as. So it doesn't change like functions do exactly, and it's also different because you can pass it's just a physical block of code that you can pass along, whereas you can't really pass functions along into Objective-C methods. So it's pretty neat in that respect, and there are many new applications that are kind of working their way into Apple's frameworks as well. So anyway, nonetheless, we're going to just briefly run through an example block here. So if I wanted to create a block that took a number and squared it and returned its result, then I can create a block called square. So the return type on this would be of type int, so I just define it like that. If I want to define that we're using a block and the name of it, I use the caret key to denote that this is going to be a block, and then I just type in square to represent the name of the variable. Then I would just go ahead and type in whatever parameter types I want to use. So if I want to pass in one int, I would just say int like that. If I wanted to have more than one thing to pass in, I could just say something like that, and that would allow me to pass two integers in as well to this block. Now, of course, for squaring, we're just going to multiply the same number by itself, so we're only going to take in one value. And with this, we're done defining how the block variable will look or behave. Now, to actually define what the block of code is, we do this by saying the equal sign, and then we use another caret key to denote that this will be the block of code. And to say what's actually in the code, we use the curly brace, and then we end it off with a curly brace and a semicolon to finish off the actual variable declaration. So with that, all we're doing inside of this block, actually before I do that, I forgot one important part. If you're passing in any parameters to your block, you always have to, after you call the caret or put the caret key up over here, you actually have to name the variables that you're going to use in this block. So if right here I said that I'm going to have one int passed in, so all I have to do is make some name for that integer that we're going to pass in like that. Now all my job is to do is use that variable that I pass in, and we're going to use the name num, and so we'll just say return num times num, like so, and that will effectively square the number, and then it will obviously return that as well. So if I want to, I can simply return this value, or call this square block rather. So I've now defined this block of code called square. Takes a parameter called it just takes an int, and I will use that to square the number. So I can say square, and then I use the brackets like so, and I can put in whatever number I want. So let's say I want to square 7, and we should get back 49. Run this, and as you can see, we get 49 as our output. So that's cool and all, but let's try another example where this time we're going to use the values that are already in our main method to actually put in the block of code instead. So blocks are aware of other variables that are around it when we're declaring the block as well. So if I want to take out the part where I actually use a parameter for this, so I'm just going to say no parameter, and now we're going to call this void, and this means that we have no parameters for this block. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable outside or before we declare our square block, and we're going to just call it num. So num7. And now when we define our square block like this, it's going to take this num variable that it sees outside of it, and it's going to say, okay, we're going to return whatever its value is right now, so 7 times 7. That's what this square block is going to do. Now the important part about this though is that blocks effectively copy the values over into the block, so that later on when we pass it around, that's the value that it's going to have. And so what this means is, you'll see in just a bit, that if I go to change my value of num, say to a value of 9, this will not actually change the value within the block. So once the block is declared, it's essentially created with those values that it had at that point in time, and then it basically can't be changed unless you had some kind of parameter, but we don't. So in this case here, you'll see that if I go to run this square function, or square block rather, even though we changed the value of num to 9 before calling the square, it doesn't matter, because once the square block is initialized with that value, it no longer changes. Now there is an exception to this though, however, which is really the new part of this tutorial, where we can use the __ block storage modifier, which basically means that we can say that a variable can actually change the values within a block. So basically how you do this is you say __ block, and now this variable is recognized by the block really as a variable. It's something that can now change within the block. So if I define this variable num as changeable throughout the block, which I denote with this __ block syntax, and what this means is that now, instead of just copying these values of 7 over, really what's going to happen is that these values can be changed because of this syntax right here. So this num assignment right here to 9 will actually change the values that are inside our square function, or our square block, because of that we declared the __ block right there. So we can go ahead and run this, and as you can see, we now have a value of 81, and again, that's just because when you use this modifier like that, that means that this variable now is recognized as the block, or recognized to the block, really as being able to change. So I can now change the values that are inside this block. These variables called num are essentially, they act as variables. You can now change them. Alright, so that's one thing that I wanted to show you in this tutorial, but the more important thing that I want to show you is how you can use blocks inside of Objective-C methods. Now, this is fairly confusing, and I'm going to try to run through it as best as I can, but forgive me if I if I can't explain it as well as you'd hoped. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to create a class, and it's just going to be called Jedi Temple. And all it's going to contain is simply a list of Jedi. So it's going to be a bunch of Jedi in the Jedi Temple. And so for this, I'm going to go into my Jedi Temple implementation over here. And I'm just going to go ahead, assign interface. And we're going to create a class extension. So I'll go ahead and add that, Jedi Temple. And to this class extension, I'm going to add a property. And it's just going to be an NS array that contains all the different values of our Jedi. So we'll call it Jedi. And it doesn't really matter what I put in here, because nobody's going to actually see this variable, and I'm only really assigning it. If I really wanted, I could just make a variable called NSArray Jedi. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm sticking to the property stuff for right now. So with that, we're just going to have this NS array, like I said, with the names of some random Jedi. So we'll use an init method right here, and we'll just simply initialize the Jedi that are in this array. So we'll say _Jedi, and just so you know, since we're using Xcode, I don't know, we're on 4.5 something at this point. Basically what this means is that the @synthesize that we used to put in, we don't have to do that anymore with properties. This is automatically done by Xcode, and by default the variable names are given the underscore name convention. So I've already done a tutorial on this, so I'm I'm not going to bother going through that, but just so you know, when I create this property called Jedi, it automatically creates the underscore variable name with that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and define a bunch of different objects here. So I want Mace to be in my Jedi temple. I'm going to have, even though this is way out of, Luke was never actually in the Jedi temple, I don't think, because it was gone long before that. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm just throwing some random Jedi that I know. I really don't know much about Star Wars, but I like to use it just because I think it's fun to use. Anyway, yeah. With that, anyway, we have our beautiful Jedi variable with these 4 different awesome Jedi inside. So now that we have that, what we're going to define in our Jedi temple, though, is one simple method that's going to go through or enumerate through all of the different Jedi names in the temple. So it's basically similar to setting up a for loop and going through all the Jedi that are in your temple. But what we can do for this is we can actually create this method, and we're going to pass in a block of information that we can allow the user to set up some kind of block, and we'll give them all the information as we go through the block. So we'll tell them, hey, here's the Jedi you're on, what do you want to do with this information? And then they can, do whatever they want in the block, sort of thing. So what we can do here is we're just going to say void enumerate. And I think I spelled that right. I already tried this tutorial and I spelled it wrong, so I decided to do it again for my own sake. But anyway, enumerate members with block. And what we're going to do is now we're going to just define some kind of block that we're going to use for this method. So what this basically allows us to do is we're going to say, when somebody creates the Jedi temple and they call this method, they can pass in some kind of block of code. But we want to give them some kind of information so that they can, manipulate whatever we're going to give them. So what do we want to give them? Well, we don't really care to give them any return type for this, so we're just going to say void for this. To define that we're using a block, we have to say the parentheses and then the caret key. But we don't actually have to name the block anything because we're not going to use that variable name. And well, I'll show you later what we're doing with that. But anyway, we can say a caret key, and that defines our block. And then we just define the parameters that we want to be able to give to this block variable. So what we're going to say is, well, we want to give this block the information of all the names of the Jedi. So we'll say we'll give them the names. Let's say, for example, we also want to give them the ability to look at the index that we're at in our Jedi temple. So we could do this by simply saying int index. And the final thing is we can also give them the ability to stop going through the list of Jedi by using a bool pointer. So we can say bool, and we'll make a pointer called stop. Oops. Like so. And then we're simply going to name this some kind of variable, like so, block. And there we go. So now we have created a block variable, or a block parameter for this method. Now just to kind of recap that, we are going to allow somebody to create their own block when they go to use this method, and these are the different parameters that we're going to give them. So like previously when we were using the square function, we allowed them to pass in some kind of int value. But in this case, we're going to be giving them these parameters. We're going to give them the name, the index that we're at, and a pointer to a bool that allows them to change it, and so they can actually request that this enumeration stops. And so that if they set the stop value to yes, then it will stop. Alright, so now that we have that, let's kind of see how we could use this. We'll get to the implementation of this method later, but I just want to show you how you can actually use this if you're somebody, well, using this code. So what I'd do if I was using the Jedi temple is I would, create some kind of temple, and I would say Jedi temple, alloc, and init. That will create my temple with all those Jedi in it. And now what I want to do is enumerate through the temple and see, I can put whatever I can pass whatever block of information I want to this temple. So I can do that by simply calling the enumerate members with block method. And as you can see, it nicely kind of fills out this block variable or parameter that we can use, and we can hit return on that, and that will automatically fill in for us this nice little block section, and we can now write whatever code we want in our block. So whatever code we write here is the block of code that's going to be passed into enumerate members with block. So what I can do with that is I can simply say, well, in this block, right, I'm going to be getting the name, the index, and this bool value or this bool pointer, which allows me to change if I want to stop enumerating through this block. So what I can do is say, well, let's say, for example, if I hit the name of Yoda. So if name is equal to string Yoda, and if I do that, I simply want to print out, let's say, something about Yoda. So I'll say, here's Yoda. And as soon as I hit Yoda, let's say, for example, I want to stop this program. So what I can do is I can change what that stop variable points to. So I'm going to say pointer stop, and you're going to point to now a value of yes. I want you to stop my program. So what this allows it to do is when this method is actually being run in our Jedi Temple class, which we'll get to in a bit, it can look at this value of the stop variable every time it sends new values to this block, and every time it looks at this when we're done, it can see if this value of stop has changed, and then we can act accordingly. So if we stop, then we can stop running our loop. So if it's not Yoda though, we're simply going to just print the name of this person. So like that. Alright, so that's what this block would look like if I wanted to run that like so. And yeah, that's pretty simple. So with that, what I'm going to do is go back into my Jedi Temple .m here and actually implement how this is going to work. So in this, I just have to say enumerate, and I'm going to define how this block of code will behave in this method. So the user already defines whatever they want in their block, and then we can decipher, or our job, in this method is really just to provide them with the information as we enumerate through all the different members in the Jedi Temple. So all I want to do is first create a bool variable. This is going to be my stop variable, and we'll set it to no. And basically, this will allow us to pass that variable in, and they can change that variable in their block, and then we can look at that later. So obviously the objective though in this enumerate members with block is really to create some kind of for loop, right? We want to go through the whole list of members. So I could say int I get 0, I less than our Jedi count, and then I would just I++. Now in here, all I want to do is I want to simply call or pass in, these values to the block of code. So obviously we have our block that we can use from the parameters here, and this block takes in the name, the index, and that stop bool. So what I want to do is I want to say, well, I want to give them the name. So to do that, I just have to say _Jedi, and I pass in I, and that will give us the value at that index. If I want to tell them what index we're at, I can say, well, here's what index we're at. If I want to give them the pointer to the stop variable, all I have to do is pass in the address of the stop variable, and that's done by using the ampersand sign, and then stop. This goes back to the C tutorials actually when we did this, and if you forgot about the C tutorials, then well, you might have to go back and kind of figure that out, I guess. But you know, basically that was just something we did back in the beginner stuff. But really what this allows you to do is when you just have a variable, you pass in the address of the variable. It allows the user inside of the block to actually change the value directly, and then outside of that, so outside of the block, we, in this enumerate members with block method, can see if they change this value. So we can now check to say, well, if our stop variable is equal to yes, then we can simply say that we want to stop. So we'll just call return, and that will end our enumerate members with block method. So now we can go ahead and test this method out. Now, I'm not sure what it was complaining about over here. I must have screwed something up. Let's see what our suggestion. Oh, yeah, fix it. All right, there we go, and that should do it. So now that I have that, we can go ahead and run this. And as you can see, we have Mace, Luke, and here's Yoda. So that's all we actually to do for calling this stuff. As you can see, what happens through this is we start out in our enumerate members with block, and inside of this method, it's just going through the list of Jedi that we have, and it's passing this information onto our block of code that we define out here. So as you can see, when we retrieve the value of Mace, we're saying, okay, that's cool, we got Mace, we'll print it out. We get Luke, we print it out. Then when we get to Yoda, we say, all right, the name is equal to Yoda, so we say, here's Yoda, and we change the stop pointer to point to a value of yes. So what this allows us to do in our enumerate members with block method is actually check to see if the block changed this value. And as soon as it hits a value of yes, then we get out of enumerating through this list of Jedi, and that's all there is to it. So anyway, I hope you understood this tutorial. There's, it's a little bit of stuff that you have to get used to. The syntax can be a little bit tricky, but really there isn't all that much to get used to for this kind of stuff. All we're really doing is defining a block right here to pass into our temple, or our enumerate members with block method. And in the enumerate members with block, we just want to provide that block that we pass in with all the given information that we say that we're going to give it. So anyway, that's how you can use blocks in your Objective-C methods. If you have any questions on this, feel free to leave your questions in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in an upcoming tutorial.